It's your own time you're wasting. Ramblings from Beyond the Classroom with Marie and Jodi.
Welcome to It's Your Own Time You're Wasting. Today's episode is called Get Out of My Classroom. Today we're going to be talking about the joys of learning walks. I am Jodi. I'm a maths teacher that now works for Beyond, writing their revision resources. And this is my co-host, Marie.
Hello, I'm also an English teacher working for Beyond, and thinking about this topic is actually giving me collywobbles.
Should we start by explaining what a learning walk is, just in case we've got
Sure.
some lucky old teachers who haven't
You
experienced
haven't
it yet?
experienced one. Is there any of those around?
If they
But-
are, I'm jealous.
Yeah, so learning walk is when some member of SLT walks around and pops into your classroom for an informal look at what you're doing. It's supposed to be a whole school thing. It's not supposed to target any individual teacher. And they're only supposed to happen something like 3 times a term, according to the unions. But the reality is somewhat different, I found.
Well, I've worked at a school that has learning walks, which only happen 3 times a term, and discovery walks, which are slightly different because all
Interesting.
staff members are expected to do a discovery walk at least once a half term. So as a junior member of staff, you're expected to go around and watch other classes as a way to learn from them.
Yeah.
But also SLT and so on would do it, and they could happen as much as you wanted, because technically it's not a learning walk, it's a discovery walk.
Yeah.
And that was actually the discovery walks, doing them was much worse than having them done to you, because
was it?
you had to go into your friends and your colleagues' classrooms and be like, just turn up, and you'd pick a class. The kids were never great at it. They'd always be like, oh, so-and-so's here. And it was just like, you just hated doing it. And you had to document that you'd done it. So you had to write down whose lessons you went into. And it was just so like awkward, because it was basically checking up on people who were either the same job as you or like your superiors, you know, your head of department or whatever. It was horrific.
And did you have some kind of checklist to look at when you were in there?
Yes, but it was very based around the students or the teachers.
Yeah. Well, that's what a learning walk's supposed to be, isn't it?
Yeah. So there was one section which was like, which of these kids do you teach? Are there any behaviour management policies or, you know, techniques that they're using? Who are they sat next to? And is that something you could, you know, does it work? Does it not work compared to your seating plan? And then the other one was, is there any like teaching techniques that you spotted? But if the answer was no, that was fine. But the idea was like, you could go in and you could see like, oh, this person's got Billy set next to John, and that works really well, so I'm going to sit Billy next to John, was kind of the idea.
Yeah, and I think in theory that's not a bad idea, to have staff watching other staff teach.
No. And it was quite nice sometimes to see, you know, the kids who didn't excel in maths excelling in science or excelling in English or whatever, you know, are happy to see them happy, which, you know, a lot of kids weren't in maths. So it was quite, it came from the right place, but didn't work.
I think the issue is you are so on edge about being observed in any way. I mean, when in my NQT year, this is no word of a lie, I had 13 formal observations plus learning walks. And
That's
you would
terrible.
think after that, I'd just be so used to it, it wouldn't bother me, but it wasn't. It actually got worse and worse and worse, even though I always got a good report and, you know, very positive feedback. It didn't seem to ever get any easier. And I think being on that knife edge all the time, that you could be told that you're incompetent or whatever at any point, is very anxiety inducing.
And the thing that I found difficult is, so not all my schools pre-scheduled them as well. There'd be like some that was like, oh, like this is, you're going to have a learning walk at some point in the next 2 weeks, but you had like absolutely no idea when. So I had a lesson on bearings with kids once, and like, so bearings, for those who don't know, is basically like angles, but it's quite specific rules. So you have to measure it from north, you have to measure it clockwise. And this was quite low ability kids, and the idea of giving them these rules without any kind of context just doesn't work with them. So I brought in loads of maps and charts, and we basically did a whole lesson on like navigation and how you use these bearings to get from one place to the other. And in terms of kind of maths and exam technique, very little progress was made.
Yeah.
But those students went from thinking this was a really boring, pointless subject to actually genuinely understanding why we had these rules. And we did loads of stuff about communicating it to each other, because you have to have it with 3 digits. So that was like, when you got 25, you didn't know if it was 25 or 125 or whatever. And so we spent a whole lesson basically playing with these maps.
Yeah.
And I had 2 teachers come in together, and one of their outputs was, but very little progress was made. And, you know, they didn't meet the learning objective, which was to solve problems with, solve exam style problems with bearings. And the other one was, that's amazing, you've done something really practical, you've really adapted that in a really good way. And that they'd seen the same lesson and they got 2 completely different views from it. And the kids loved it. It was last thing on a Friday and they had a great time.
Oh yeah, because you're not going to start doing a complex exam style bearings lesson last thing on a Friday, are you?
Exactly. And so the challenge with it is kind of, you can see the same thing without seeing the larger context of what's happening. And it can see it as a positive or a negative without actually having that information.
So I came out of teaching and I briefly went back in again, and the job was sold to me on the basis that it was very small class sizes, which it was. It was a private school, 10 per class, and that there were no learning walks. No learning walks. And very few formal observations. It was much more laid back. So I thought, okay, I can give this a try. So I went back in.
There's a book coming.
Yeah, I was working 2 days a week and everything was fine. And then I went to a teacher meeting and they gave out this handout that was about 6 pages long of all new things they were bringing in. And I think the second bullet point down said learning walks. And that was me out. I literally handed my notice in because I just could not go through all that again, of being on display, as it were, and someone coming in and, like you say, without context, just making a judgment on your lesson. Because for all that they say it's a whole school thing and they're not pulling out individual teachers, unfortunately, that is exactly what happens.
So do you think, because I always kind of felt it was quite intimidating, it was used as a way to micromanage teachers. Do you think there is a positive way to use a learning walk?
I don't think there's anything wrong with SLT watching teachers work, but I think there has to be a trust between the teachers and the SLT, and it has to be something that's just woven into the culture of the school rather than this actual thing with a title, learning walks, that inspires fear and dread into everybody's heart. You know, that's because I didn't mind people coming into my classroom ever, just popping in or even helping out. But to come in and literally with a clipboard and be writing things down, it's very, very off-putting. Do you know what, Jodi? Let me tell you this. My mouth has gone really, really dry, and that is a sign of stress, and that's just talking about it.
Yeah, they make you nervous, and it is this kind of overhanging dread of them.
Yeah.
And then there are those people that would be like, oh, they're so much fun, I can't wait to be checked out. I never liked those people. Too cheerful.
Those people are alien to me. I don't understand them, because to me it was like the sword of Damocles over your head constantly, you know. And if they happened to come in when you had one of those classes that just was not doing what you wanted them to do, the panic that induced, oh no, please. And I used to have bad dreams about, you know, someone popping into my lesson to just have a look how it was going, and some lad at the back lighting a cigarette and things like that, because you know, that was in my dream. Obviously that didn't really happen. But it was just the anxiety of it was so high.
It's your own time you're wasting, so why not stick the kettle on, put your feet up and have a cuppa? Ah, bliss.
The worst learning walk I had was a really small, this was in a state school. I had 8 kids in the class, which gives you an idea of how much attention they needed. I also got a TA for this class and I had learning walk. So there's 3 adults in the classroom with 8 children at this point. And one of the children chose to use a inappropriate sexual comment towards me, which I sent them out for and punished them for. The TA went and got the kind of, they had a key worker, got the key worker, got out. Consequence of all this is they were excluded for a couple of days, which is fine. But after the lesson, I had to then explain what said sexual comment meant to the learning walk person because they didn't understand why I'd freaked out.
No
and
way.
I had just hit the roof. Fair play to the teacher. They didn't say anything during the session. They just let me deal with it. But afterwards they were like, what was wrong with that? And I had to explain this to my boss. And I was like,
that's worrying.
Oh, this is so embarrassing. And so that was my worst one.
You have to laugh, don't you? Well, Jodi, I think it's time to introduce our guest for this week, Debs. Debs, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, I'm also a former maths teacher and head of year, and I'm a content writer for Beyond as well, for maths and pastoral resources.
So, what is your experience of learning walks, Debs? What do you think?
I've been on, obviously, the receiving and had the same horror stories as everybody else, and depending on what the motivation was and what the person coming in to see was, I've been on those. But I've also been in schools where we've had themed learning walk weeks. And that was often an excuse to pick up the books and check marking, including the cupboard book on there, or they'd look for one particular thing, they'd give us a theme. So they were even more horrifying than the usual learning walks. And I couldn't find much positive in those. At another school, we actually had a different name for them, which I can't remember. They promised us, they were put on timetables for anyone in SLT or middle management. Everybody had one. So literally there was one every single lesson every day. And you worked in pairs to go round. And we were told it was going to be a supportive thing, almost like patrol, to help the teachers, which would have been fine. That's what we thought we were doing once a week. We all had that on our timetable. But actually, we were then given a clipboard where we could find 3 positive students, which was nice. I was quite happy to go in and do that. Any problems with a particular student, so they could see if one was coming up a lot on the walks. Again, no problem with that whatsoever. But also what the learning objectives were, what was going on, were they written on the board, all the rest of it. Some of us did it and absolutely refused to put anything negative about any member of staff, because obviously not correct for the unions. So some of us just went round and found our free, we'll just used to going, hi everyone, have you got 3 good kids for me? Who's been really good, not just this lesson, but over the week or over the term? So that I liked that, because then children that weren't always praised got a good praise and got in the book and got a certificate or a sticker or a house point. That was nice. But as for issues with staff, unless the staff member was really, really struggling, which was usually supply, then we just most of us refused to write them down. But there were other people that were writing those down and writing them. So literally they didn't have a single lesson when someone might not come in. And if they knew an area was a problem area, like if they had a head of the department that wasn't a head of department, like a cover one or something, they deliberately target those areas even more, because they thought the problems for the children would be more.
That's like mission creep though, isn't it? So we've got an excuse to get into the classrooms, so we're just going to take it that step further and make it be a bit about the teacher.
So obviously there's a big impact on the teacher, and there's a lot of kind of negatives for the teacher, and I'm sure we'll find some positives somewhere. What do you think the impact on the students was? I know you've done a lot with pastoral. Did the students find learning walks difficult?
I don't think so, because especially in the school where we had them every lesson, because they were just so used to it. But they did say that some teachers had more learning walks than others, shall we say, that more people came in.
They're not daft, are they? They soon realise what's going on.
Yeah, they'd say, we never get them in this department. It's always in science, for example, which was the one where we didn't have a head of department for a while, or it's always in this one, it's
Yeah.
never in that. Interesting. I think they got to ignore it in the end. And I think it depended who came in as well, because obviously from myself doing the learning walks, I only saw it myself and the person who was walking with me, and we had the same
Yeah.
attitude towards.
Yeah.
We weren't here to
Yeah.
upset the teachers. We were here to support the teachers. And if we saw a behaviour,
Yeah.
we took that child out and dealt with it. We'd say, is there anyone you want us to have a word with? You know, we'll
Yeah.
happily do that as well to
Yeah.
make it much more supportive. So, and we did get told that they liked us coming into the lessons, the teachers, because
Yeah.
they knew if they saw me or the other lady with me that we weren't there, we were actually there to support.
That's one way that it could work when people are coming in to actually give you a hand. That's great.
That wasn't what we were supposed to have done, though. Marie. We were supposed to have filled. We did fill in the sheet. We just didn't fill any negatives other than students.
Did you never get picked up on that though?
No, because we filled in what we wanted from the sheet. It was like filling
Yeah.
the sheet. So we did. We
Yeah.
just say we didn't say. If we saw a negative, like might have said, seen someone wandering the corridor, you know, like
Yeah.
this particular child, or we deliberately, because they would want us to put something negative. If we saw a supply class, and I mean a supply like a day supply, not a, as we all know, that's another conversation. Cover supervisors and TAs having to cover whole lessons. I mean, an actual day's supply, the rarity that was paid for when they came in. If we saw major problems in that classroom, then we would write something
Yeah.
negative down, and
Yeah.
we'd go and try and support, but we would
Yeah.
write something negative down because they were in for the day.
Yeah, and they needed a bit of extra support.
We used to have, at the place where I did my very first placement as a trainee teacher, you'd have constant learning walks like that, but they weren't really learning walks, it was more patrol. But if they came in, so if you caught a student chewing gum, you had a consequence board and you had to put a C for chewing. And if someone came into your classroom, member of SLT, and saw a C next to someone's name, they'd get an automatic after school detention. And it always really bothered me because it was like, me as a teacher, if I catch you, that's okay. But if the head catches you, then you get a worse punishment. And that really bothered me. So I like the idea of kind of being supportive and kind of following through and making sure that you're backing up your teachers, but also not outranking them in that way. And it turned into this kind of like, kids would be like, don't put a C, don't put a C, and everything like that. Or like, and it just made it into an us and them, but I would be the us with the kids.
I've taught in schools for 23 years, in schools and colleges. And at the beginning, when I was teaching, patrol used to be exactly that. If you'd put a child outside your door, you could either message patrol and they'd come pick them up, which was usually an SLT member or someone in middle management that was free, or they'd be outside, and if they were caught out, even if they were out for a few minutes, then literally patrol would come and have a word with them, and then they wouldn't put them back in the room. They'd wait for the staff member to do that as well. You know, it was a very supportive measure. But
that is my pet peeve, when other teachers send a kid back into your classroom and you're like, you don't know what he's done or she's done to be out there. You need to wait. I saw something on a popular YouTuber that does lots of funny things about teaching, and she was sending a kid back in. I was like, I'm unsubscribing if you did that as a teacher, because you've no idea why they're out there. They could be out there because they were just messing around and they needed a breather. They could be out there because they spat in your face and you're waiting for SLT to come. And sometimes you don't want them back in your classroom, ever.
No, absolutely not.
I've had that before. I've had, from the teacher's point of view, at one of the schools, the one that had the targeted weak ones, I've had very supportive SLT come round, and then I've heard them basically bollock the child outside as well, which is very supportive. Yeah. And then I've had another member of SLT who is now actually even higher up and come in and said that child is coming back in because I've said they're coming back in, and they've believed the child on that. So yeah, I agree, it can be very unsupporting as well.
Have you, kind of as the person getting the learning walk, receiving the learning walk, have you ever had a really positive experience, or would you say generally it's been quite negative?
To be honest, I think that there wasn't so many when I first started teaching. Yeah. And by the time you get to middle management, they tend not to always it depends what they're looking for. If they're actually looking for reasons to write something negative down, they don't very often go into middle managers' rooms, because they
Which in itself is a problem, isn't it? Because middle managers sometimes aren't that good at teachers. Not saying you personally, obviously.
Exactly, but they don't very often because they don't perceive that as, but they don't hear a lot of noise. They don't hear the problems so much.
Yeah.
So I think it's more on that. But yeah, I mean, I've had people come in and it's been nice. Like when I first started in other schools, moved around,
Yeah.
I've taught over 3 different secondaries and a couple of colleges as well, and it's been, sometimes it's been nice. It's just say the heads, usually if the head is walking round and they're just popping in that, but I've always, that's not even been like an official learning walk, but they've knocked on the door, oh, can I come in and have a look, who's been good, you know, which is nice. And when they ask who's been good,
I love that question.
Yeah, I like that, who's been good, that's the best one, because
Yeah.
that is supportive, and then they award a point on the spot, you know, for house point or something, which is nice.
Yeah.
I've always liked that type of learning walk as opposed to writing down what your learning objective is, and have you got the learning objective on the board, have you got the 3 outcomes, have you got this, you know, are you following that, oh, let's pick a random book and check it's been marked within the last 2 days. That sort of thing is not positive.
Yeah, that's more like scrutiny, isn't it, than support.
It's your own time you're wasting. Ramblings from beyond the classroom with Marie and Jodi. There's not a lot they don't know about teaching.
When I was a special needs teacher, I was a Senko, and it sometimes could take us 15 minutes to write down the learning objective. So I used to not bother. And then I explained that when it was picked up on. And then I was told, well, why don't you print the learning objective out on a sheet of stickers, and then they can stick it in, like as if I've got time to do that for 25 lessons a week. You know, amazing.
And why does it matter? Why do you need your learning objective?
In some schools, they get to, as long as they can see it, it's on the board, you know, as long as the child's had it shared with them, that's fine, which is all right. But others, they want it written down, underlined with a margin, and it has to be, so, and it does take the children too long. It's just a waste of time.
It's dates always got me. I went to a school where every subject except for maths, you had to write the date in like maths form. So like 3/9/2022. But in maths, you had to write it in words. And it was so much effort. And I don't see the point of writing a date. It doesn't matter when you learned this. You need some sort of chronology and you need it in order, but it'll be in order because it's in a book.
Yeah, because it's in a book.
Why do you need a date? There is no point in a date.
I'm with you there. There's no point spending time and faffing about with things that aren't absolutely essential.
Exactly.
Because you don't have the time, do you? You might have. I had 50-minute lessons, which felt like nothing.
Oh, I've had 35-minute lessons.
Oh, I went to school with 35-minute lessons. Yeah, how did that work?
I've only done 50 or 60. I prefer 60.
The 35, mostly you had double periods.
Yeah.
But you'd have, with younger years, you'd have a single, which would be a 35. And the way that the school managed it was all right, because you'd have 35 maths with year 7, and that was a numeracy lesson. So you didn't really write anything down. You didn't bother with books and learning objectives because it was just mathematical skills. And then in English, they did the same, and they'd have 35 minutes of silent reading. So you could use, if you kind of planned it well, that 35 minutes was quite a good way to kind of do something that was an essential skill. For some of them, it was completely pointless. But like, for the younger years it worked, but once you got to about year 9, it was a waste of time. And you just, by the time you got anything out, you were done.
One of the learning walks or drop-in walks or whatever we want to call them on it, also they used to also look at what your classroom looked like, whether it was tidy or not, whether your desk was tidy. And
I would have failed.
Bear in mind, displays are not what we're supposed to do. We're only supposed to oversee them. If your display wasn't relevant and up to date and had all the school terms on and all the rules and everything, because a child might have dared to rip the rule sheet down or scribble over it or wrote what they really thought of the rules down, of writing everything down. And by rules, I do not mean things like, you know, I don't even mean rules like you will not smoke in this classroom or something. I mean rules like you must write the learning objective and underline it, that type of rule list and that written on the board.
Just to circle back, I like that you had to have the rule, do not smoke in this classroom. That wasn't just a given. You had to write down that rule just to make it clear.
Yeah, as per my dream.
So a huge thank you to our guest Deb. It is lovely not to be outnumbered by English teachers for a change. So thank you so much for joining us. It's really nice to see that other side of
I'm
what
coming out in a
learning
rash though, Jodi,
Ugh.
being in close proximity to two
I
maths
think I
teachers.
mentioned numbers about 4 times. You must be struggling.
Dear me.
And thank you very much for having me. And just in case any student isn't clear, maths is more important than English. Thank you.
Thank you,
Oh,
Deb.
Debs.
So we like to finish our podcast with a little thing called 2 stars and a wish. Before we do that though, shall I tell you my positive learning walks?
Oh,
I
definitely.
feel like we've
yes.
been a bit negative this
Yeah,
episode. So this is at the last school that I worked at, and it was not doing very well as a school, to be honest. In October we had an Ofsted inspection, and then the head teacher just never came back to work. Which gives you an idea of how that Ofsted inspection went. So the class that I had was about 20 kids. I was supposed to have a TA, but they were never there because they were assigned to one kid, and the kid was a school refuser. So if the kid didn't come to the class, then she didn't come to the class. And it was a really challenging behaviour class. I won't go into it all because it will probably make me cry. But I got this learning walk, and I was just like, you know what? It's going to be what it's going to be. Whatever happens will happen. I'm going to do my lesson as normal, and they'll see what it's like.
Yeah.
So I did my lesson as normal, and they saw what it was like. And afterwards, the deputy head was like, why on earth have you got these kids in one lesson? What are they playing at? You shouldn't have X, Y, Z in the same room at the same time. I will sort this. So for the rest of the week, I'd only have one of them come, and the other two would work with the member of SLT and work quietly, and I just had to give them a worksheet.
Amazing.
And then by the end of the next week, they'd rearrange the class so I didn't have any of them there. And I've been saying this before, like, this class just isn't working. I can't do this. And they came in, and not only did they say, this isn't working, they fixed it. And it was such a sense of like, it's not you.
Yes.
This class isn't going to work. There's too many.
Because of the dynamics.
Yeah. And so exactly what you wanted out of a learning walk. I didn't feel got out at all. They saw that the class dynamic just was impossible to work with, and they fixed it.
Yeah, amazing.
So I think that's probably
if they were all like that, that would be brilliant.
Exactly. And it was that acceptance that there is nothing I can do in that situation. That class is not going to behave because they can't with all those people in. Yeah. But that's
amazing.
One of my stars.
So that's your star. Have you got another star, or have you got a wish?
I can't think of another star at all.
That's fine.
But I kind of want to be more positive than that. But I'm struggling, to be honest, with learning walks.
Well, what would your wish be then?
Oh, my wish would be for learning walks to be the positive, supportive thing that whoever came up with the idea wanted them to be.
Yeah.
Because I genuinely don't think any teacher, whether they be SLT or an NQT or whatever, goes in wanting to undermine and stress other teachers out, because nobody is that cruel. So it's been kind of perverted into this horrible micromanaging event, but I don't think that would have been the original concept.
No, I agree.
So I wish learning walks were whatever the original concept was, because it was probably quite a nice thing. What would your 2 stars and a wish be?
Well, my 2 stars that I really liked hearing about from Debbie was when they went in and they said who's been good today, who's working really well. I loved that. I don't think I ever experienced that. I can see that would work really, really well. And also the solidarity that they would not write anything negative about a member of staff. I really thought that was brilliant, because that's what you need in teaching. You need to stick together. And my wish would be similar to yours, Jodi, but I wish there could be more trust between SLT and your general teaching population.
Yes.
So that things like learning walks don't become a big issue. They don't become anxiety inducing because you're all working together as one team. That would be my wish. But, you know, who knows? We might get it one day in schools.
It's going to be something that just keeps evolving, isn't it? And as much as I want to be all positive, there's a lot of less positive things about teaching.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we're all there for the same reason. We love being a teacher, we love being in
Exactly.
the classroom, and we just need to make the environment where people can embrace that love.
Yeah, and everybody can thrive. Pupils and
Yeah.
teachers. Yeah, lovely.
Exactly. And on that note, I think
Yes.
we'll finish. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already.
Ooh.
I've been Jodi.
And I've been
Thank
Marie.
you.
Thank you very much.
This podcast is proudly produced by Beyond. Please bear in mind the views and opinions expressed are those of individuals and may not represent those of Beyond or Twinkle.